Ryan O'Connor stood in his corner office on the 5th floor of Seattle Fire Department headquarters, surveying the city's skyline with the satisfaction of a man who'd earned every inch of his authority. At 42, he commanded the respect of 300 firefighters across 12 stations, his reputation built on 20 years of service and a chest full of commendations. His girlfriend Sandra, Battalion Chief of Station 7, perched on the edge of his desk in her perfectly pressed uniform, reviewing personnel files with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly how things should run. The office smelled of leather and old smoke, walls decorated with photographs of Ryan shaking hands with mayors and governors. But beneath the accolades in the corner office, there was an emptiness he couldn't quite name, a sense that something was missing from the formula of his perfectly constructed life. 3 floors below, Mia Torres wiped grease from a fire engine's pump panel, her hand steady despite the frustration burning in her chest. For 6 months, she'd been assigned to equipment maintenance, polishing chrome and testing hoses while the rest of her recruit class responded to calls. Her certification scores were perfect. She'd topped the physical fitness test, aced a written exam, and completed the live fire training in record time. Yet Chief O'Connor kept her grounded, citing adjustment period and departmental concerns without ever meeting her eyes during the brief conversations they'd had. The engine bay echoed with the sounds of trucks rolling out to another call she wouldn't answer, and Mia bit back the anger that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. Sandra's voice drifted down from the chief's office during her lunch break, carrying through the ventilation system with crystal clarity. Women don't have the upper body strength for real firefighting. Ryan, you know that as well as I do. The word struck Mia like a physical blow, confirmation of what she'd suspected for months. She set down her polishing rag with careful precision, jaw clenched against the response she wanted to give but couldn't afford to voice. 8 years in the Navy had taught her patience, discipline, and how to prove herself through action rather than argument. Tomorrow would be another day of maintenance duty, but Mia Torres hadn't survived aircraft carrier fires by giving up when someone underestimated her. Hello, my friends. Before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Ryan's morning began with coffee from his private machine and a department briefing where every battalion chief nodded at his assessments. His corner office overlooked Elliott Bay, a view that reminded him daily of how far he'd climbed from the projects of South Seattle, where he'd grown up. Sandra brought him lunch from the steakhouse downtown, kissing his cheek while discussing their vacation plans to Cabo. The other chiefs deferred to his judgment. The mayor's office called him personally for consultations, and his salary afforded him a waterfront condo and a Tesla. Yet during the quiet moments between meetings, he caught himself staring out the window, wondering if this was all there was. The department ran like clockwork under his command, response times at record lows, training programs nationally recognized. He'd built systems, protocols, hierarchies that functioned with military precision. His relationship with Sandra was equally efficient. Both understood the demands of leadership. Both valued order and tradition. They attended department functions as the power couple everyone expected to see. Their romance as carefully managed as their careers. But efficiency and emptiness, Ryan was discovering, often look remarkably similar. 3 floors below, Mia's world consisted of engine bays, equipment rooms, and the constant hum of trucks rolling out without her. She arrived before dawn, checking every piece of gear with a thoroughness that had kept her alive on the USS Reagan. Her hands knew the weight of every tool, the pressure points of every valve, the maintenance schedule of every pump. The other rookies, all men, had been assigned to active companies within 2 weeks. Only she remained in purgatory, polishing chrome while her skills deteriorated from lack of use. The firefighters who passed through treated her with awkward courtesy, unsure how to categorize a female rookie who'd been sidelined. Some offered sympathetic looks, others avoided eye contact entirely, and a few echoed Sandra's view about women in the profession. Mia kept her head down and her mouth shut, the way she'd learned during her first weeks on the carrier. Complaining would only confirm their assumptions about female firefighters. Her Navy service record, including 3 fire medals and a commendation for saving 7 sailors during an engine room blaze, remained locked in her personnel file unread. During lunch, she sat alone in the break room, eating homemade tacos while the active company shared stories from their morning calls. The smell of their gear, smoke and sweat and adrenaline, reminded her of what she was missing. Her muscles ached from disuse, trained reflexes growing sluggish from months of equipment maintenance. But Mia had waited 8 years through Navy deployments for shore leave, had waited months by her mother's hospital bed counting down the days. She could wait a little longer for her chance to prove what she already knew. The afternoon brought Chief O'Connor through on inspection, Sandra at his side like a shadow. He barely glanced at Mia, nodding approval at the polished engines before moving on. Sandra's eyes, however, lingered with undisguised disdain, taking in Mia's small frame and grease-stained hands. "Equipment maintenance suits her," Sandra remarked to Ryan, loud enough for Mia to hear. The dismissal was complete, casual, crushing in its certainty. Mia's hands tightened on the wrench she held, knuckles white with suppressed rage. 8 years on aircraft carriers, fires that would make these warehouse blazes look like birthday candles. Men's lives saved because she was small enough and brave enough to crawl where others couldn't. But in this department, she was nobody, just a girl who polished trucks. She forced her breathing steady, channeling fury into focus, and returned to her work with renewed determination. As evening fell, Ryan returned to his empty condo and his expensive whiskey, scrolling through news alerts about department efficiency ratings. Sandra had evening duty, their relationship compartmentalized as neatly as everything else in his life. The condo was spotless, modern, void of anything that might indicate a real person lived there. He poured another drink and stared out at the city lights, wondering when winning had started to feel so much like losing. The call came at 2:17 a.m., 5-alarm fire at a waterfront warehouse in the industrial district. Ryan was in his truck before the second ring, adrenaline overriding the whiskey he'd consumed. Sandra's voice crackled over the radio, already en route with Station 7, reporting heavy smoke visible from 2 miles away. By the time Ryan arrived, the warehouse was an inferno, flames shooting 40 feet to the collapsed roof. For companies were already on scene, deploying lines and coordinating evacuations from adjacent buildings. The warehouse stored industrial chemicals, transforming the fire into a nightmare scenario of toxic smoke and potential explosions. Ryan established command, barking orders while mentally calculating wind direction, water supply, structural integrity. His 3 best engine companies attacked the blaze from different angles, but the fire fed on accelerants, growing faster than they could contain it. Sandra reported homeless people might be inside. The warehouse was known as a winter shelter despite being condemned. Ryan ordered search and rescue teams deployed immediately despite the risk. At headquarters, Mia heard the 5-alarm tone and bolted upright in her bunk. She wasn't on duty. Technically wasn't supposed to be at headquarters at all, but she'd taken to sleeping in the spare room rather than her empty apartment. The radio chatter painted a picture of chaos. Multiple floors involved, partial collapse imminent, civilians possibly trapped. Without conscious decision, she was in her turnout gear and running for the equipment truck. Nobody had called her, but nobody had explicitly told her to stay behind either. She arrived at the scene to find controlled chaos, engines deployed in defensive positions, firefighters streaming water into the inferno with little visible effect. The building was a death trap, cheaply constructed with inadequate fire suppression, its metal shell buckling from the heat. Ryan stood at the command post, face illuminated by the flames, orchestrating the response with grim determination. He didn't notice Mia slip past the perimeter, didn't see her studying the building's structure with eyes that had analyzed carrier fires under combat conditions. The situation deteriorated rapidly when Ryan heard screaming from the 4th floor, his search and rescue team trapped by a stairwell collapse. 3 firefighters and Ryan's own battalion chief were stranded with fire below and structural failure above. Every aerial ladder was already deployed or couldn't reach that section of the building. The ventilation shafts were too small for standard-sized firefighters, the exterior too unstable for rope descent. Ryan's commands became sharper, more desperate, as minutes ticked past and the 4th floor began to sag. Sandra appeared at his side, soot-streaked and furious. "We need to pull back. The whole building's coming down." Her voice carried the edge of panic, unprecedented for someone of her experience. Ryan shook his head, unable to accept abandoning his men, But the brutal mathematics of firefighting offered no good options. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the floor collapsed entirely. The radio carried the trapped men's voices, growing fainter as smoke overcame them. Mia stood at the building's rear, staring at a ventilation shaft barely 18 inches square. She'd crawled through smaller spaces on the Reagan, navigating through smoke and flames to reach men trapped in collapsed compartments. Her turnout gear would barely fit, and the shaft was compromised by heat, but offered a direct line to the fourth floor. Without thinking, without asking permission, she grabbed a rope and entered the building through a ground-floor access point that everyone else had written off as too dangerous. Ryan's radio crackled with an unfamiliar voice, dispatch reporting unauthorized entry into the building. He spun around, scanning his personnel, trying to identify who would be stupid enough or brave enough to defy direct orders. The trapped firefighters' voices grew weaker, consciousness fading from smoke inhalation. Ryan's fists clenched, torn between hope and fury of whoever had just sentenced themselves to death in a doomed rescue attempt. Inside the building, Mia moved through darkness punctuated by flames, her breathing apparatus the only thing between her and toxic death. The ventilation shaft entrance was exactly where building schematics suggested it would be, hidden behind a collapsed storage unit. She used her Halligan bar to force the shaft open, metal screaming in protest. The opening was barely large enough for her compact frame, impossible for the larger men who comprised 90% of the department. She clipped her rope to structural supports, testing each anchor point with the paranoia that had kept her alive at sea. The shaft angled upward at 45 degrees, walls scorching hot, even through her gloves. Mia pulled herself forward using elbows and knees, every foot a battle against heat, smoke, and the screaming of metal under stress. Her radio picked up confused chatter. Command couldn't identify who was inside, didn't know if it was hero or suicide. She kept moving, focusing on the rhythm of breath and motion, remembering carrier fires where hesitation meant death. The shaft grew narrower, squeezing her gear against walls that radiated killing heat. At the fourth floor, she found the trapped men clustered near a window, faces pale behind their masks. Chief Battalion Officer Marcus Webb saw her first, disbelief warring with desperate hope. Who the hell? His question died as Mia grabbed the nearest firefighter, a man named Patterson who outweighed her by 80 pounds. She looped her rope around him, explaining in clipped sentences how he'd fit through the shaft if he ditched his tank and crawled. Patterson stared at the impossibly small opening, then at the sagging floor, and made his choice. Ryan paced at the command post, listening to garbled radio transmissions from inside. Someone was coordinating evacuation through an impossible route, voice calm despite circumstances that should inspire terror. Sandra grabbed his arm, insisting they needed to sound the evacuation horn, accept the losses, and save the company still outside. Ryan shook her off, focused entirely on the voices from the fourth floor. They were coming out. Somehow, impossibly, they were coming out. Patterson emerged from the ground floor entrance, gasping and burned but alive. Minutes later came the second firefighter, then the third. Each man told the same impossible story. A small firefighter, female voice, crawling through spaces that shouldn't accommodate human bodies. She'd send them down one at a time, staying behind to ensure each made it through the shaft. Now only Battalion Chief Webb and the mystery rescuer remained on a floor that would collapse any second. Ryan's radio crackled with Webb's voice, hoarse from smoke. "Chief, you need to see who saved us." The building groaned, metal supports failing with sounds like cannon fire. Sandra screamed for general evacuation, her authority as battalion chief demanding compliance. Ryan stood frozen, unwilling to abandon whoever was still inside, unable to process the impossible rescue he'd just witnessed. The fourth-floor window showed flames, thick smoke, no sign of human movement. Then two figures appeared at the ground-floor entrance, Webb supporting a much smaller firefighter who could barely walk. Mia collapsed 10 feet from the building as the fourth floor pancaked in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The blast wave knocked her flat, flames washing over the space she'd occupied seconds before. Ryan was running before conscious thought, his hands dragging her away from the inferno, others helping with Webb. They pulled both firefighters behind the safety line as the entire structure imploded, sending a mushroom cloud of ash and embers into the night sky. Ryan ripped off Mia's mask and found her unconscious, face streaked with soot, back of her turnout coat melted from heat exposure. Paramedics swarmed immediately, loading Mia onto a stretcher, while Ryan stood paralyzed by revelation. The rookie he'd dismissed, the woman he kept on equipment maintenance, had just pulled 4 firefighters from certain death through a route he wouldn't have attempted in his prime. Sandra pushed past him, face twisted with something between rage and fear. She violated orders, entered without authorization. Her voice died as every firefighter within earshot turned to stare at her with open contempt. The men Mia had saved stood in a protective semicircle, daring anyone to criticize their rescuer. Harborview Medical Center's burn unit became Ryan's world for the next 6 hours. He sat in the waiting room, still wearing his soot-stained turnout coat, unable to process the night's events into coherent thought. Mia Torres, the rookie he'd dismissed, the woman Sandra called unsuited for firefighting, had succeeded where his best men had failed. Webb sat beside him, oxygen mask dangling from his neck, face grave. "Chief, there's things you need to know about Torres." The statement hung heavy with implication. A doctor emerged with updates. 2nd and 3rd degree burns on Mia's back and shoulders. Severe smoke inhalation, but she'd survive. The burns would require skin grafts and months of recovery. Ryan felt sick with guilt and confused by emotions he couldn't name. He'd almost gotten her killed through his own prejudice and willful blindness. Webb was already on his phone, pulling up information he'd apparently known for months. "Chief, look at her actual service record, the one you never bothered to read." The screen showed a career that made Ryan's accomplishments look pedestrian. Firefighter Petty Officer Mia Torres, U.S. Navy, 8 years on 3 different aircraft carriers. She fought 27 major fires at sea, earned 3 Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals for valor. Her training record showed specialty certifications in confined space rescue, hazmat response, and high-angle operations. The photograph showed a younger Mia in dress uniform, chest covered with ribbons, standing beside admirals. She had more actual fire hours than half his department combined. "Why didn't she say anything?" Ryan's voice came out as a croak. Webb's expression was equal parts pity and disgust. She tried, submitted her full service record twice, requested meetings to discuss her qualifications. You delegated it to Sandra, who buried everything and kept her on equipment maintenance. The words hit like physical blows. Sandra had known, had actively concealed Mia's background, had sabotaged a decorated veteran out of petty prejudice. Ryan felt his world tilting, foundations cracking. The investigation began before dawn, starting with questions about why a condemned warehouse had been occupied. Fire Marshal Chin arrived with a folder thick with violations, building permits that should have been denied, inspection reports that had been altered. Every document pointed to corruption so systematic it required insider access. Sandra's name appeared again and again, signatures approving permits for buildings that should have been condemned, inspection schedules mysteriously altered, safety violations overlooked for properties owned by a real estate consortium called Apex Holdings. Ryan sat in his office at 6 a.m., files spread before him like evidence of his own blindness. Sandra had been taking bribes for at least 2 years, approving dangerous buildings to remain operational in exchange for cash payments. The warehouse fire wasn't an accident. It was inevitable given the systemic safety failures she'd enabled. 5 firefighters had nearly died because his girlfriend valued money more than lives. The realization was a knife to the gut, personal and professional failure intertwined. Chin entered without knocking, face set in grim lines. "We found payment records, Chief. $300,000 in the last 18 months, all from Apex Holdings. She signed off on 17 buildings that should have been condemned. The evidence was damning, incontrovertible. Sandra had betrayed everything the department stood for, had put every firefighter at risk for money." Ryan's hands shook as he signed the authorization for her arrest. By noon, Sandra was in handcuffs, being led from her station in front of assembled crews. She'd tried to spin it, claiming she was being scapegoated, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her face twisted with rage when she saw Ryan, screaming accusations about disloyalty and betrayal. The firefighters watched in silence, their contempt palpable. She'd endangered them all for personal profit, had nearly killed 4 of their brothers. The patrol car drove away with Sandra still screaming, her career and freedom evaporating in minutes. Mia awoke in the hospital to find her room filled with firefighters. Webb sat beside her bed, Patterson and the others who she'd saved standing awkward guard like protective brothers. The pain medication made everything fuzzy, but she recognized Chief O'Connor standing in the corner, face haggard. "You saved my men," Ryan said, voice rough with emotion he was clearly struggling to control. Mia tried to smile, managed a grimace instead, pain shooting through her burned back. The department rallied around her with the fierce loyalty firefighters reserved for their own. Crews from all 12 stations sent flowers, cards, care packages. The union president arrived with legal representation, making clear Torres had their full support against any disciplinary action for unauthorized entry. Local news picked up the story. Female rookie saved 4 firefighters through impossible rescue. Mia's Navy service record leaked, turning her into an instant hero. The phone calls from talk shows and national news programs started within hours. Ryan visited daily, spending hours at her bedside while she drifted in and out of consciousness. He'd read her full service record a dozen times, each reading deepening his shame. She'd been everything he claimed to value. Experienced, decorated, skilled, and he dismissed her based on Sanders' prejudice and his own assumptions. The guilt was crushing, transformative. He found himself talking to unconscious Mia, confessing failures and making promises he hoped she'd remember. Sanders' arrest made regional news, then national headlines when the scope of her corruption became clear. 23 buildings compromised, $800,000 in bribes, a conspiracy that endangered thousands. The mayor called for a complete department review. Federal prosecutors filed charges of reckoning endangerment, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Her lawyer tried to implicate Ryan, suggesting he must have known, but the evidence was clear. Sandra had worked alone, covered her tracks through falsified reports and manipulated records. The preliminary hearing was held in a courtroom packed with firefighters, all wearing dress uniforms in solidarity. Mia watched from a wheelchair, still bandaged but insisting on attending. Sandra tried to maintain her composure, but cracked when Webb testified about the warehouse fire, the trapped men, the impossibly small shaft that only Mia could navigate. "That building should have been condemned 6 months ago," Webb stated flatly. "Chief Torres nearly died cleaning up your mess." Sandra's face twisted with hate and desperation. She's nobody, a glorified equipment clerk. The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. The judge banged his gavel, but Sandra kept talking, making it worse. "You're all choosing her over me? I built my career." Her lawyer physically covered her mouth. The outburst was devastating, revealing prejudice and entitlement in equal measure. Every firefighter in the room stood simultaneously, a silent wall of condemnation that needed no words. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and severity of charges. Sandra would await trial in custody. Facing 20 years if convicted, she was led away in handcuffs, still screaming about unfairness and persecution. The firefighters filed out in formation, their statement made. Outside, media swarmed, but Webb gave the only quote that mattered. "Chief Torres is the kind of firefighter we all aspire to be." The soundbite went viral, cementing Mia's transformation from dismissed rookie to departmental hero. Ryan stood at the courthouse steps, watching his former girlfriend disappear into the justice system. He felt nothing but relief and lingering shame. Sandra had been his choice, his blindness, his failure to see what was in front of him. He'd chosen efficiency over character, appearances over substance. The realization was humbling in ways his corner office had never prepared him for. The departmental hearing was held in the main auditorium with every firefighter not on active duty in attendance. Mayor's office representatives sat in the front row alongside city council members and federal investigators. Ryan stood at the podium, reading a prepared statement that apologized for systemic failures and announced comprehensive reforms. His voice was steady, professional, everything a chief should sound like. But when he reached the section about Mia Torres, emotion cracked his composure. Firefighter Torres submitted her service record twice, requesting fair evaluation based on her documented experience. Both requests were dismissed without proper review. Ryan paused, swallowing hard. I failed her, and in doing so, failed this department. Her qualifications exceed those of many active firefighters, and she was sidelined because of prejudice I should have recognized and prevented. The admission was public complete, humiliating in the way true accountability demanded. The audience shifted, 300 firefighters witnessing their chief's vulnerability. Ryan continued, detailing specific changes, mandatory review of all personnel decisions, independent evaluation of rookie assignments, zero tolerance for discrimination. Then he announced Mia's promotion to lieutenant, effective immediately upon her return from medical leave. The room exploded in applause, firefighters on their feet, cheering with genuine joy. Webb wheeled Mia to the front, her face flushed with emotion and pain medication. Ryan met her eyes for the first time with honesty and respect. Lieutenant Torres, you exemplify the courage and skill this department was founded to honor. I'm sorry it took a disaster for me to see what was always there. Mia accepted the promotion papers with shaking hands, unable to speak past a lump in her throat. The standing ovation continued for minutes, firefighters shouting her name, celebrating her rise from dismissed rookie to decorated officer. The mayor took the podium, announcing a citywide review of building safety protocols and a special commendation for Mia's rescue. Federal prosecutor James Winters followed, outlining Sanders' expected sentence, 15 to 20 years federal prison, plus civil liability that would bankrupt her. Ms. Burke's corruption endangered every citizen in Seattle and directly led to a fire that nearly claimed 5 lives, Winters stated grimly. The legal consequences were severe, unforgiving, exactly what justice demanded. Media descended afterward, turning the auditorium into a press conference. Mia handled questions with grace despite obvious pain, deflecting praise to her Navy training and the men she'd saved. When asked about Chief O'Connor's previous dismissal of her, she simply said, "Everyone deserves a chance to recognize their mistakes and do better." The quote made national news, her generosity contrasting sharply with Sanders' bitter courthouse rant. Ryan watched her handle the spotlight with growing admiration that was becoming something more dangerous. She sat in a wheelchair, bandaged and burned, fielding questions with humor and humility. This was who he dismissed as equipment clerk, who Sandra had called unsuited for firefighting. The magnitude of his error was staggering. When the press finally cleared, he found her alone in the hallway, staring out a window at the city. "Thank you for what you said," she told him, voice quiet. "About failing me. That took courage." Ryan shook his head, unable to accept praise. It was just honesty long overdue. They stood in awkward silence, chief and lieutenant, savior and saved, something unspoken building between them that neither was ready to name. Mia's recovery took 3 months of skin grafts, physical therapy, and rehabilitation that pushed her to the edge of quitting daily. Ryan visited every week, bringing department updates and gradually transitioning to personal conversations. He learned about her Navy service in detail. The carrier fires, the close calls, the brotherhood of sailors who trusted each other with their lives. She learned about his journey from projects to command, the emptiness of achievement without meaning, his growing realization that he built a career on foundations of sand. The attraction grew slowly, complicated by rank, by recent history, by the fundamental transformation both were undergoing. Ryan started questioning everything, his command style, his priorities, his obsession with efficiency over empathy. Mia found herself forgiving him piece by piece, recognizing genuine remorse and change. Their conversations extended into hours, coffee turning into dinner, professional updates becoming personal confessions. Neither acknowledged what was happening, both terrified of the vulnerability it demanded. The department embraced Mia's return with celebrations that bordered on festival. Webb had kept her lieutenant position active, ensuring she wouldn't return to equipment maintenance. Ryan assigned her to Station 12, the busiest house in the city, partnering her with veterans who could appreciate her skills. Her first day back was covered by local news, cameras capturing her arrival in full uniform, back scarred but spirits unbroken. The crew treated her like returning royalty, their lieutenant, Their hero. Ryan found excuses to visit Station 12 more than strictly necessary. Inspections became conversations. Policy reviews turned into coffee in the kitchen. Professional interactions carrying undertones of something more. The department noticed, gossip spreading like wildfire, but the general sentiment was approving. If the chief had fallen for the woman who'd saved 4 lives, that was a love story they could support. Webb encouraged it shamelessly, playing matchmaker with the subtlety of a brick through a window. The invitation came 6 months after the warehouse fire, joint training exercise with the Navy at Whidbey Island Naval Air Station, carrier firefighting techniques for Seattle crews. Ryan requested Mia accompany him as liaison officer, her Navy experience essential for coordination. The assignment was legitimate, necessary, and provided 3 days away from the department's knowing looks. They drove north in department vehicles. Conversation flowing easier as Seattle disappeared in the rearview mirror. Whidbey Island was Mia's old world, familiar in ways that made her homesick and proud simultaneously. She introduced Ryan to her former commanding officer, Captain Richards, who shared stories about Mia's service that made Ryan understand just how extraordinary she truly was. The training was intense, carrier firefighting scenarios that made warehouse fires look manageable. Ryan watched Mia command respect from Navy personnel and Seattle firefighters equally, her expertise undeniable, her leadership natural. The evening of the second day, they walked the beach as sunset painted the sound in amber and rose. The conversation had exhausted professional topics hours ago, drifting into territory that felt dangerous and inevitable. "I was wrong about you," Ryan said quietly, the understatement of the decade. Mia laughed, the sound carrying pain and forgiveness. "You were wrong about a lot of things." He couldn't argue, could only nod and accept the truth. "I'm falling in love with you," Ryan confessed, the words tumbling out before courage failed. "I know that's complicated, given everything, given the rank difference in history. But I need you to know you've changed how I see everything, including myself." Mia stopped walking, turning to face it with eyes that held tears and hope. "I'm falling, too," she whispered. "Have been for months, terrified to admit it." The kiss was inevitable, gentle, profound in its acknowledgement of the impossible becoming real. The return from Whidbey Island felt different from the drive up. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but heavy with everything they had not yet said out loud to the world. Ryan drove through the Washington highways with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near Mia's, close but not quite touching, as if both of them were afraid that making it real might somehow make it fragile. The kiss on the beach had changed something permanent, something neither of them could unfeel, and now they were carrying that secret back into a department that thrived on rumor and perception. Every mile closer to Seattle felt like stepping back into a reality where love had rules and consequences. Once back at the department, they tried to act the same, but it was impossible. Conversations that used to end in polite goodbyes now lingered in quiet looks. Briefings carried a strange warmth underneath the professionalism. When Ryan spoke in meetings, Mia could hear the care in his voice even when he was discussing budgets or response times, and when she reported from Station 12, he listened with an attention that went far beyond duty. Neither crossed a line, but everyone around them could feel that something had shifted. The air itself seemed to hum with it. The firefighters noticed immediately. Some smiled knowingly, others whispered in corners, but no one mocked it. After everything Mia had survived, after everything Ryan had admitted, there was an unspoken belief that whatever was growing between them was earned. Webb, never subtle, dropped comment in front of them about how life's too damn short to pretend you don't care, earning eye rolls and faint blushes from both of them. Still, neither Ryan nor Mia was ready to give their feelings a name. The fear of ruining what they had rebuilt was stronger than the desire to rush it. Mia threw herself into her work, determined to prove that her recovery was not a fluke. At Station 12, she led drills with sharpness that reminded everyone why she had been one of the best before the fire. She trained rookies, ran simulations, and even took part in controlled burns to regain confidence in her body. Every movement was still shadowed by pain, but she refused to let it define her. Ryan watched from a distance, proud and worried in equal measure, knowing how much she was pushing herself to feel whole again. At night, they talked. Sometimes on the phone, sometimes in quiet corners of the station after long shifts, sometimes over late dinners that neither wanted to end. They spoke about the future without naming it, about what they wanted from life beyond titles and medals. Mia admitted she had once believed she would never trust a command structure again after the Navy. Ryan confessed that for the first time in his career, he was thinking less about how he would be remembered and more about how he wanted to live. Those conversations stitched them together more tightly than any dramatic confession ever could. The shadow of Sanders' upcoming trial hung over everything. Every new headline reminded them that the past was not finished with them yet. Mia felt a quiet dread whenever she imagined sitting in the courtroom, facing the woman whose decisions had nearly killed her. Ryan felt a deeper anger, knowing how close his own failures of judgment had come to making that tragedy permanent. They promised each other, without saying it directly, that they would walk through whatever came next together. That promise became their anchor. Weeks turned into months, and the distance between what they were and what they would become grew smaller. They began to imagine a life that wasn't just survival and duty, but partnership. Mia found herself picturing Ryan not as her chief, but as the man who brought her coffee when her hands shook, who listened when nightmares came. Ryan found himself imagining mornings that didn't start with crisis, but with her beside him, steady and alive. Those dreams scared him almost as much as they gave him hope. By the time the department's annual award ceremony approached, Ryan knew what he was going to do. The decision wasn't impulsive. It was a result of every mile driven, every hospital visit, every late-night conversation. Every moment he had watched Mia refuse to be broken. He wanted to choose her in front of everyone, not as a scandal, not as a rumor, but as his future. And Mia, though she didn't know the plan, felt the same certainty growing quietly in her chest. Whatever came next, she was ready to stop being afraid of loving him. The engagement happened 3 months later during the department's annual award ceremony. Ryan had planned something public, wanting everyone to see him choose her, honor her, claim her as his future. He proposed on stage after presenting her with Medal of Valor, Seattle's highest honor for bravery. The ring was simple platinum. The speech was heartfelt. The answer was yes before he finished asking. The assembled firefighters erupted in cheers, stomping boots creating thunder that shook the auditorium. Sanders' trial concluded the following week with guilty verdicts on all counts. 15 years federal prison, $2 million restitution, permanent revocation of her firefighting certification. The judge's statement was scathing. Her corruption had endangered thousands, betrayed public trust, nearly caused multiple deaths. Sanders showed no remorse at sentencing, glaring at the firefighters who attended as if they betrayed her. Ryan sat in the front row with Mia beside him, both wearing dress uniforms, neither speaking. When Sanders was led away in chains, Ryan felt only relief that justice had been served. The wedding was held at the Seattle Fire Department headquarters chapel. The ceremony performed by the department chaplain, who'd counseled both through their respective traumas. Mia wore her Navy dress whites, Ryan his formal chief's uniform, both looking impossibly young despite their years. 300 firefighters filled the chapel in dress uniforms, honor guard lining the aisle. Captain Richards flew in from Whidbey to give Mia away, his pride evident. The vows were traditional, simple, spoken with voices that shook with emotion. The reception transformed the department headquarters into a celebration that blended firefighter brotherhood with Navy camaraderie. The cake was shaped like a fire engine. The decorations featured both departments' emblems. The speeches ranged from hilarious to tearful. Webb gave the best man speech, roasting Ryan's initial blindness before praising his growth and redemption. Patterson shared the story of his rescue, voice-breaking when describing Mia's courage. By evening's end, there wasn't a dry eye in the building. Mia's promotion to captain came 8 months later, announced during her second trimester pregnancy that made her uniform uncomfortably tight. She became the youngest captain in Seattle FD history at 32. Her appointment greeted with department-wide approval. Ryan had recused himself from the selection process, ensuring her promotion was merit-based and unimpeachable. The ceremony was smaller, more intimate, but no less meaningful. She wore maternity uniform pants and radiated pride that had nothing to do with the baby. The pregnancy was planned, wanted, celebrated with joy that felt almost excessive after years of struggle. They attended Lamaze classes together, Ryan reading parenting books with the same intensity he brought to fire code revisions. Mia continued light duty through her 7th month, refusing to be sidelined despite Ryan's protective concerns. The nursery was decorated in fire department red and navy blue, a crib surrounded by both departments' memorabilia. They debated names endlessly, settling finally on Hope Elena, for hope that had survived despair, and Elena after Mia's mother. Hope was born on the anniversary of the warehouse fire, timing so perfect it felt like providence. The labor was long, difficult, complicated by scar tissue from Mia's burns, but she approached it with the same determination that had pulled 4 men from fire. Ryan held her hand through 18 hours, whispering encouragement and love, promising her anything if she just breathed through the next contraction. When Hope finally arrived at 11:47 p.m., perfect and screaming and beautiful, both parents wept with joy so intense it was physically painful. The hospital hallway filled with firefighters in dress uniforms, 300 strong despite the midnight hour. They'd come straight from a department ceremony honoring the warehouse rescue's 1st anniversary. When Ryan emerged with Hope in his arms, showing off his daughter to his crews, the men snapped to attention in formal salute. Webb started the applause, but within seconds the entire department was cheering, celebrating new life born from sacrifice and redemption. Mia watched from her hospital bed, exhausted and radiant, surrounded by the family she'd bled for and saved, living the dream she'd almost given up on: love, respect, family, and a career where her worth was finally recognized.